You finally stop. The day is winding down, the immediate obligations are just paused. The room around you is perfectly quiet. It's that exact moment of stillness you've been craving, maybe even desperately bargaining for, all week long. The noise of the outside world is faded, leaving just a soft hum of the evening. This is it. This is the moment you're supposed to recharge, the moment you're supposed to just breathe. But as you settle into that silence, you realize something. The quiet in the room really doesn't match the relentless noise in your head.
You finally stop. You look over at your quiet desk, see that soft glow of the paused laptop, and physically, you settle in. You expect relief, right? You expect this deep, settling exhale to wash over you, signaling that the work is done and it's finally safe to rest. But instead of relief, this strange, quiet tension creeps in to take its place. It's almost like your body has come to a complete halt, but your internal engine is still quietly humming, vibrating with this anxious energy that absolutely demands a destination. Suddenly, the stillness doesn't feel like a sanctuary. It feels like a waiting room for the next emergency.
You finally sit down. For a brief moment, you let out a sigh, that is, until a thought pops up. I should probably get a few more things done. Instead of peace, you get this immediate, jarring emotional collision. Your body is physically resting, anchored to the furniture, but your mind is just racing, pulling your attention right back to an unfinished checklist. You find yourself completely unable to just power down and exist in the quiet. It's a profoundly uncomfortable space to be in. You're far too exhausted to actually complete another task, yet you feel far too guilty to allow yourself to just close your eyes. You're caught in this brutal tug-of-war between profound fatigue and a deeply demanding critical inner voice.
This profound discomfort actually has a name. It's called productivity guilt. It's defined as the uncomfortable feeling that rest is wasteful or undeserved, driven by the belief that personal worth is tied to achievement or constant busyness. It's that heavy, nagging feeling that resting is somehow self-indulgent or entirely unearned. When you genuinely believe that your value is strictly measured by what you cross off a list, doing absolutely nothing suddenly feels inherently wrong. It feels like a lapse in character. You start to view moments of doing nothing not as a basic biological requirement, but as a moral failing.
Weighing output versus self-worth. We begin to look at ourselves kind of like a battery that exists solely to power a house. If we aren't producing, we feel exactly like a drained, useless battery. But how did we actually get here? Well, from a very young age, and certainly early in our careers, we're consistently praised primarily for our output. We're rewarded for the grades we produce, the hours we log, and the visible hustle we project. Over time, we internalize this deeply ingrained cultural conditioning that falsely equates our value as human beings with our economic output. We've completely fused our output with our self-worth, leaving literally no room for our inherent value outside of what we produce.
When you tie your self-worth to your job title or work output, you play a dangerous game. Guilt over doing nothing stems from deeply held beliefs that we must earn our worth. When your self-worth becomes conditional on what you produce, your mind starts to interpret quiet periods of rest not as a natural biological need, but as a moment of extreme vulnerability or even failure. If you believe your worth has to be constantly justified by your actions, then resting feels incredibly dangerous. The guilt over doing nothing stems from this deeply held, exhausting belief that we must constantly earn our right to simply exist. And when you're living under the quiet, heavy mandate that your existence must be continually earned, true relaxation is entirely impossible.
61%. If you feel this way, you are absolutely not alone. Consider the broader occupational context of our modern exhaustion. 61% of U.S. workers are languishing. They're struggling with engagement, feeling emotionally blunted, and running on dangerously depleted reserves. This statistic quietly frames a massive systemic reality. It shows us that this inability to rest is not an individual flaw. It's not a personal failure of time management. It is a shared, widespread condition. We're existing in a culture where millions of people are silently running on empty, staring out the window, and wondering why they just can't seem to recharge.
And this brings us to the reality of chronic workplace stress. Our modern work environments create conditions where true downtime feels incredibly risky. But why does our nervous system adapt this way? Well, when you're constantly under pressure, facing endless emails, tight deadlines, and the expectation of constant availability, your brain actually gets tricked into thinking the environment is constantly demanding action. Your nervous system adapts to a baseline state of hypervigilance. Stillness literally feels unsafe, because dropping your guard in an environment that constantly demands your performance, that triggers a very real biological alarm bell.
It's vital we use the right language for this experience. The World Health Organization strictly defines burnout as an occupational phenomenon resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed, not a medical condition. It's absolutely crucial to note the phrasing here. It's not a medical condition, and it is certainly not a personal defect. It's an occupational syndrome. It's something that happens to you under specific, prolonged environmental conditions. You don't burn out because you're weak or because you lack resilience. You burn out because you've been operating in an environment that has demanded way more resources than it has replenished over a significant period of time.
There are 3 dimensions of burnout, and each requires a moment of real acknowledgement. First, feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, a physical and emotional heaviness that sleep alone just cannot fix. Second, increased mental distance or cynicism related to one's job, an emotional wall that builds up just to protect whatever energy you have left. And third, reduced professional efficacy, a deep, frustrating mental fog. When you feel a total lack of motivation across these 3 dimensions, you aren't failing some sort of test of willpower. Your system is in a documented physiological state of depletion. Your body and brain simply lack the capacity to act.
So we have to draw a hard, unwavering line between 2 things we constantly confuse: laziness versus exhaustion. Laziness is a moral judgment. It's a culturally manufactured label used to shame people with absolutely zero clinical basis. Exhaustion, on the other hand, is a biological, highly measurable reality. When a system is chronically stressed, the biological clock slows down. Cortisol levels drop. The prefrontal cortex, which governs executive function, is heavily impacted, and the system literally crashes to force you to stop. One is an insult, and the other is a genuine biological SOS signal.
Laziness does not exist. What looks like laziness is always a signal of an unmet need for rest, meaning, safety, or support. Researcher Dr. Devin Price frames this beautifully. Once we separate the judgmental label of laziness from our identity, we can actually see clearly. Your inability to produce means your system is genuinely depleted. It's a signal asking for care. Understanding this requires a massive shift in how we speak to ourselves. It means moving away from a harsh, demanding inner critic and adopting a stance of radical self-care and genuine curiosity about what our bodies actually need. The body requires psychological detachment, because knowing you're exhausted and actually recovering from it are 2 very different things. The science of recovery shows us that the body needs complete psychological detachment to heal. If you're resting physically but punishing yourself mentally with guilt, ruminating over unread emails or mentally calculating what you should be doing, that entirely defeats the biological purpose of the rest. Your body's stress response cannot properly downregulate if the mind is still sending panic signals. You might be sitting perfectly still, like a cooling cup of tea on a windowsill, but biologically, your nervous system is still running a frantic marathon.
We have to fundamentally reframe our relationship with downtime. Rest is recovery, not a reward. You don't have to earn it by clearing your checklist, and you absolutely don't lose the right to it just because your output was low today. Rest is a fundamental, non-negotiable biological necessity for sustaining your nervous system. Now, unlearning that reward mindset takes time, but it starts with realizing this truth. Rest is the fuel that keeps the light on, not a prize you get at the finish line. It's the very foundation of your functioning, not some conditional bonus.
The room feels less accusing now. When you begin to internalize that truth, the exact same quiet room we started in feels completely different. The silence feels less accusing. That unfinished checklist doesn't have a vice grip on your attention anymore. You can simply fold it away with a note that says later, and do it without any accompanying shame or panic. You step out of the hypervigilant cycle of proving your worth and into a self-compassionate framework where stillness is finally safe. In this quiet space, your exhaustion is met with profound understanding and care, rather than a demanding sense of guilt.
So, what if your value as a human being was never up for debate, even when you produce absolutely nothing at all? Imagine what it would feel like to completely untangle your inherent self-worth from your daily output. To know that you are enough, just as you are, sitting quietly in a room. You might just find that you finally have the permission you've always needed to silence that inner critic, put the checklist away, and just rest.